The fluorescent lights hummed in courtroom 7. Every seat was filled. Nobody moved. Judge Randall Carter lifted his gavel and looked at me the way someone looks at a problem they have already solved. My name is Daniel Mercer. I have been a Brenton City police officer for 11 years. I have run toward danger while others ran away. I have stayed composed in situations that would break most people. I believed those years would count for something when I sat down in that courtroom. They did not. Officer Mercer, the judge said, his voice flat as old pavement, this court finds that you applied excessive force on the night of October 4th. You are ordered to pay medical damages of $14,000 to the plaintiff. Gasps swept through the gallery. Someone behind me said, "That cannot be right," loud enough for half the room to hear. My attorney grabbed my arm. I didn't move. I looked at the man at the plaintiff's table, Victor Vale. The man who had put a knife in my arm 2 months earlier while I was ordering him to drop it. He was wearing a clean shirt, and when the judge's words landed, he smiled. Not a small, private smile. A wide one. My chest went tight in a way that had nothing to do with the sling on my arm. I had been stabbed before. I had been lied about before. But watching Victor Vale smile in that courtroom, I felt something I had never once felt wearing this uniform. Betrayal. Pure and bone deep. Then the courtroom doors creaked open behind me. I didn't turn around. My mind had already left the building. It went back to October 4th, back to Kettler parking structure on the east side of Brenton City. I was alone, answering a disturbance call, man harassing a woman on the lower level. I had done 100 calls like it. Victor Vale was beside a blue sedan when I found him. Hands raised, calm, cooperative. I thought the job had given me an easy one. I told him to step toward me. He nodded. One step. Then another. Then he moved. The knife came from behind his back so fast I felt it before I saw it, a burning tear through my left forearm. I staggered but stayed up. I reached for my weapon. He came at me again. I grabbed his collar and brought him down onto the concrete and held him there until backup arrived, 4 minutes later. 4 minutes is a long time when blood is running freely down your sleeve. At Calverton Medical Center, the surgeon told me the blade had stopped 2 centimeters from a major artery. 14 stitches. 3 weeks in a sling. 2 months later I was sitting in a courtroom being told I was the aggressor. As the bailiff moved toward me, I turned to my partner, Officer Rena Torres, and kept my voice low. Something about this case is wrong. She looked back at me with the tight, steady expression of someone who had been thinking the same thing and was waiting for me to say it out loud. I stepped out into cold November air. My attorney was still inside, looking for words that did not exist. Victor Vale had already found the cameras. He was on the courthouse steps with his defense attorney, Philip Strand, a tall man in an expensive coat who moved like someone for whom losing was a concept he had read about but never experienced personally. Victor was laughing. Not the relieved kind. The deep, comfortable kind that belongs to a person who was never in any doubt. A reporter pushed a microphone toward him. "I'm grateful the court saw the truth," Victor said, looking straight into the lens. "That officer nearly killed me. I had no choice." Reporters nodded. Nobody challenged him. I stood across the street in my dress uniform, arm in its sling, watching the man who had stabbed me perform grief for television cameras. Then Victor looked up. He found me immediately, like he had known exactly where I would be. He reached up and tapped his chest, right over his bandage. Same location as mine. He held it just long enough to make the meaning clear. Then he mouthed 2 words. Slow and deliberate. "You're finished." The cold that moved through me had nothing to do with November. He had not been surprised by the verdict. Not nervous. Not relieved. He had expected every single moment of this day. He stood there with the ease of a man who was not receiving an outcome. He was collecting a delivery he had already arranged and paid for. Rena was at her desk when I arrived the next morning, the case file spread open and her coffee untouched. I pulled the evidence processing log, she said before I sat down. The parking garage footage is gone. Not delayed. Not pending review. Gone. I had suspected this. During the trial, the prosecutor told the court the footage was corrupted, a storage fault, the kind of thing that happens. The judge accepted it without a single follow-up question. But I knew that camera system. I had walked past it on dozens of patrol shifts. It was part of the city's updated surveillance network, installed 2 years earlier with newer hardware and a dual backup function. The green indicator light had been blinking steadily the night of the attack. The system was running without fault. A system like that does not simply fail, Rena said. I leaned over and looked at the log. The footage had been marked corrupted just 49 hours after the incident. Not weeks later during a routine audit. Not during a maintenance window. 49 hours after I nearly bled out on that garage floor. Not unless someone made it fail, Rena added quietly. We looked at each other across the desk. Neither of us said the next part out loud, but we were both arriving at the same place. If the footage had been deliberately removed, the bad ruling was not a mistake. It had been arranged. My phone buzzed on the edge of the desk. Unknown number. I picked it up. The voice on the phone was even and unhurried. Officer Mercer. My name is Captain Olivia Grant. Internal Affairs Division. I'd like to speak with you privately, not as a suspect, but as someone connected to an active review. Internal Affairs calling me directly before any appeal was filed. Not standard procedure. We met that afternoon at a coffee shop on Harwell Street. Captain Grant was in her early 40s with calm, steady eyes and the deliberate manner of someone who never wasted a word. She wore plain clothes and chose a table away from the window. No recorder visible. She studied me the way someone does when they are deciding where the truth is hiding. She asked me to walk through the night of the attack. I did. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked one question. Who handled the footage between your incident and the date it was declared corrupted? I told her I didn't know. That was the honest answer. She wrote something and then asked 2 careful questions about the prosecutor's pre-trial evidence requests. She showed no interest in what I had done in that parking structure. Her focus was entirely on what had been done to the evidence after I left in an ambulance. When we stood to leave, she paused at the door with her back to me. Officer Mercer, she said quietly, be careful. Some people inside that building have been lying. And they are not done yet. She walked out. I stood there holding cold coffee, feeling unexpectedly exposed. Rena called that evening as I sat down with food I had no appetite for. I've been going through Judge Carter's case history, she said. Her voice was flat in the way it gets when something has genuinely unsettled her. Daniel, this is not the first time. She had pulled archived court records going back 5 years. In that time, Judge Randall Carter had presided over 9 cases in which physical evidence, security footage, lab reports, recorded statements, had been declared corrupted or inadmissible before the trial concluded. 9 cases. In every single one, the defense attorney was Philip Strand. In 7 of the 9, the charges against the defendant were reversed, reduced, or dropped entirely. Same judge, Rena said. Same lawyer. Same result every time. I set my fork down. That's not coincidence, I said. No, she said. It absolutely is not. Outside my window, Brenton City moved through its ordinary evening. Cars going home. People getting dinner. Everyone trusting without thinking that the justice system was running honestly. Someone has been running the same play over and over, I said slowly. Strand manages the defense. Carter controls the courtroom. The evidence disappears. The defendant walks. Or the victim ends up paying, Rena said. Like me. The full weight of it landed then. Not one bad ruling. A practiced, polished system, so smooth that each individual piece looked almost innocent on its own. You had to see all 9 cases at once to understand what you were really looking at. I had walked directly into the middle of it. Rena found the night attendant through Kettler's employment records. His name was Hector Van, and he had worked the overnight shift at that parking structure for 6 years. He had filed a report on the night of the attack. He told the responding officer he heard the struggle from his booth near the entrance and saw a man running from the lower level right after the alarm triggered. His description matched Victor Vale perfectly. He could place Victor moving away from me before a single backup unit arrived. He was never called to testify. The court record listed him as unavailable. No subpoena issued. No attempt made to locate him, just one word and a blank space. We drove to his address in the Carver Hill neighborhood. He answered the door in a work shirt and went pale when he recognized me. His eyes fell briefly to the edge of the scar visible below my cuff. "I'm not talking about that case," he said immediately. I kept my voice steady. I told him I was not there to put him in danger. I just needed to understand what had happened. He looked past my shoulder at the street, then back at me. His hands pressed against the doorframe. "Night before the trial," he whispered, "a man came here. No name. He said if I appeared in that courtroom, it would destroy my life. My job, my family, all of it." He paused. He knew private things about me that I'd never told anyone. He looked at me once more. "I'm sorry," he said. Then he closed the door. 3 days after we visited Hector Van, Rena passed me a message. The prosecutor for my trial wanted to meet. Privately. Away from the courthouse and the precinct. Her name was Stacy Owens. During the trial she had seemed professional and careful, not hostile toward me, but not helpful either. She presented the case file she was given and let the courtroom handle the rest. I had assumed she was simply doing her job with what she had. Now she wanted a corner booth before business hours with no advance notice to anyone. She wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at the table before speaking. "I didn't believe the case," she said. "From the first day that file landed on my desk, nothing added up. The timeline had gaps. The defense's injury claims didn't match my copy of the ER report. And when I requested the garage footage, twice, Judge Carter shut me down both times. He ruled the corruption issue was settled and there was nothing more to discuss." She looked up. "What I found out last week is that the defense submitted paperwork claiming the footage was corrupted before the city's technical team ever formally assessed it." I went completely still. "Before the technicians even looked at it," I said. She nodded. "They filed the documentation in advance. They recorded the corruption before the official process had started." She paused. "That means someone already knew it was going to disappear before anyone went looking for it." My coffee had gone cold without my noticing. That night I pulled out my hospital records and read them properly for the first time. I had received my full discharge summary from Calverton Medical Center the week after my release but had only skimmed it. I was too angry and too sore to give it proper attention. I had seen, significant wound, and moved on. Now I read every line. Dr. Patricia Hollins, the surgeon on call that night, had written her assessment with clinical precision. The blade had entered my left forearm to a depth of 4 centimeters, tracked along the muscle tissue, and stopped 2 centimeters from the brachial artery. Her note read, had the wound extended marginally further, significant vascular damage and acute blood loss were probable. In plain terms, I had come close to bleeding to death on a parking garage floor. During the trial, Philip Strand had called my injury a superficial laceration 3 separate times. Judge Carter had never once asked him to support that with a page of medical documentation. But that was not what stopped me cold. At the bottom of Dr. Holland's report was her separate assessment of Victor Vale, brought in by the same ambulance and treated in the bay next to mine. His injuries, bruising to the right shoulder, deep abrasions on both palms, dislocated left wrist. I sat up straight. Those were not the injuries of a man who had been overpowered and beaten down. They were the injuries of someone who had lunged forward hard and been physically stopped. The entire story told in that courtroom had been backwards. I got home late on a Wednesday. The streetlights along Pembroke Avenue flickered in the cold, and the street was quiet. My front door was open. Not wide, just 2 inches of dark space between the door and the frame. Enough that cold air had been seeping in for a while. I drew my weapon before stepping inside. I cleared every room. Closets, bathroom, the spaces behind the furniture. Nothing. Nobody. Everything in my apartment was exactly where I had left it that morning. Laptop on the desk. Watch on the nightstand. Cash in the kitchen drawer untouched. But in the center of my kitchen table, someone had carved 4 words directly into the wood with something sharp. LETITGO. I stood there and looked at it for a long time. They had been inside my home. Not to steal. Not to hurt me, not yet. Just to show me they could. Wherever I looked, whatever I found, they had already been there first. It was not a threat exactly. It was a demonstration of reach. A reminder that the door can open whenever they decide. I called Rena. I did not file a formal report. I still didn't know who in the department I could fully trust. "They're scared of you," Rena said. "Scared people are the most dangerous kind," I answered. I slept on the couch that night with my weapon beside me and the carved message visible from where I lay. I did not sleep much. Captain Grant called me the following Monday. "I need you to come in today," she said. "We have found something." Her office was on the 4th floor of the Civic Center building, separated from the main precinct by 2 security doors and a corridor that felt deliberately removed from everything below it. Standing up there, I understood the distance better than I had before. Grant closed the door and sat across from me. "My team has been examining the technical records from the Kevlar parking structure camera system," she said. "The footage from October 4th was not corrupted." I kept my expression still. "Storage corruption leaves a trace in the system log," she continued. "Overheating, write failures, power problems, they all leave marks." We examined the log closely. There is no trace of any failure. The system ran cleanly until exactly 49 hours after your incident. She opened a folder and slid a document across the desk. At that point, the footage from October 4th was deleted. Manually. By someone with authorized access to the city's evidence management system. The deletion was logged at 11:42 in the evening, 2 days after your attack. I looked at the document. A timestamp. A user ID number. Someone with a valid login, I said slowly, deliberately deleted the only recording that showed Victor Vale pulling the knife before I could react. Grant looked at me steadily from across the table. "Yes," she said. "And we now know who gave the order to do it." The name on the authorization form meant nothing to me. "Conrad Briggs," Grant said. "He's registered in the city system as a contracted legal consultant. He was issued a temporary digital access credential 18 months ago through the evidence portal. In 18 months, that credential was used for nothing at all, until October 6th. I turned the document over slowly. "Who is he?" I asked. Grant folded her hands. "He is Judge Randall Carter's brother-in-law." The room went very quiet. "He works as a private legal advisor," she continued. "Not a licensed attorney. No official standing in any court proceeding. But he maintains informal working arrangements with several defense attorneys practicing in this city." A pause. "Including Philip Strand." I took a moment before speaking. "So Carter's brother-in-law used a city credential to log into the evidence system and delete the garage footage 2 days after I was stabbed," I said. "That is what the record shows." "And Carter presided over my case?" "Yes." "And Strand, who works with Briggs, was Victor Vale's attorney?" "Yes." I leaned back in my chair. The full shape was visible now. Not a bad ruling. Not a missing file. A machine with 3 working parts. Carter owned the courtroom. Strand managed the defense. Briggs erased the evidence. Did the evidence clerk know what he was authorizing? I asked. He says he was told it was a routine consultant access, Grant said. I believe him. He was used. The same way I had been. Just from a different angle and with less bruising to show for it. Rena spent 2 days pulling Victor Vale's full history. When she laid it in front of me, my jaw tightened. He was 34 years old with 6 arrests in 8 years. Assault causing bodily harm. Armed robbery. Aggravated battery. 1 charge of attempted assault with a deadly weapon filed just 14 months before the night he came at me in Kettler. Not 1 conviction. Every case had collapsed before reaching a verdict. 3 times, key evidence was ruled inadmissible. Twice, the main witness either recanted or failed to appear. Once, the charges were dropped with no explanation in the public record. I wrote down the names from each file. Philip Strand appeared as defense attorney in 4 of the 6 cases. Judge Randall Carter had presided over 3. He hasn't been lucky, Rena said, spreading the files in a line so the pattern was plain. He has been protected. Every time the system built a case against him, someone reached in and dismantled it. I thought about how easily Victor had smiled in that courtroom. The tap on the chest on the courthouse steps. No nervousness. No relief. Just a man collecting what had already been arranged for him. He had not attacked me by chance on the night of October 4th. I had been selected. He came at me knowing, from years of experience, that the same quiet system would handle the aftermath. I had been a problem he had already made arrangements to solve. Understanding that burned differently than the knife had. The call came on a Thursday morning. Officer Mercer. Grant's voice had something beneath the control, a forward energy, like someone who had been walking toward a place for a long time and had just arrived. Come in today, she said. There's something you need to see. I was there within the hour. She led me to a small viewing room without explanation and pointed me to a chair in front of an open laptop. Her technical investigator pressed play. Kettler parking structure. Camera 4. Lower level. October 4th. 11:22 p.m. I watched myself walk into frame, flashlight moving in steady arcs. I watched Victor Vale standing at the blue sedan, both hands raised. Then I watched him pull the knife. No hesitation. No escalation from me. His right hand came from behind his back and the blade caught the light a half second before it hit my arm, while my hands were still open and empty. I watched myself stagger and draw. I watched Victor lunge again. I watched myself bring him down and hold him on the concrete while blood spread beneath my arm until the backup light swept through the entrance. When the screen went dark I sat quietly for a moment. The deletion only hit the primary archive, Grant said. The backup server ran on a completely separate automatic cycle. They had deleted the wrong copy. After 11 years on the job, I had never been more grateful for a small technical detail in my life. Grant moved without delay. By Friday she had filed an emergency motion to reopen the civil case, submitting the footage and supporting documentation directly to the Judicial Review Office, bypassing the standard queue by citing active misconduct concerns. The hearing was set for the following Tuesday. I spent the weekend trying to act normal. Grocery run. Better deadbolt on my front door. Each morning I sat at my kitchen table with the carved message still in the wood and ate breakfast across from it, refusing to change chairs. Rena called on Sunday. The room will be packed, she said. 3 TV crews confirmed. 2 city council members. The police commissioner's office put out a statement saying they're monitoring developments closely. I asked about Strand's response. Countermotion filed, she said. He's arguing the footage is tainted and the chain of custody can't be verified. A short pause. Standard delay tactic. The backup server was never part of any chain he touched, I said. Grant's team has the logs and timestamps. He has no real ground. And Carter? The pause that followed was just long enough to carry meaning. He hasn't recused himself, Rena said carefully. That settled on me like something heavy. The same judge who had ruled against me with a blank face was still going to be in that chair on Tuesday, and now he had every reason in the world to shut the hearing down before it went any further. I had survived one rigged courtroom. I wasn't certain I could survive two. Tuesday arrived sharp and gray. I wore my full dress uniform. Not to perform. I just wanted to be standing correctly when the truth got its moment in that room. The gallery was full before the session started. Journalists in the back with open notepads. 2 city officials I recognized near the center aisle. Rena 2 chairs to my right, still and composed. Across the room, Philip Strand whispered rapidly to his team with tight, urgent movements. Judge Carter took the bench and the room went quiet. He looked the same as before. Pressed robe. Measured posture. No visible crack. Grant's legal counsel presented the motion clearly. He walked through the full documented timeline, the attack, the deletion, the credentials, Conrad Briggs, the backup archive. He submitted the recovered footage as the primary exhibit and formally asked the court to view it before ruling. Carter barely glanced at the preview clip. The chain of custody for this material is unverified, he said flatly. It was recovered from an unapproved secondary system. This court is not obligated to accept it. Something had changed in his voice. The ease was still layered on the surface, but underneath was a tightness I hadn't heard before. Not authority. Urgency. The pressed, careful tone of a person no longer speaking from confidence. Furthermore, he continued, picking up his pen, I find insufficient grounds to reopen this matter, and I am inclined to dis. The courtroom doors swung open. The sound cut straight through his sentence. Every head in the room turned. Captain Olivia Grant walked in first. Behind her came 3 internal affairs agents in plain clothes, each carrying a document case. Behind them, 2 uniformed officers from the Brenton County Sheriff's Department, not the city police, and not anyone whose loyalty ran anywhere near this courtroom. Grant walked down the center aisle at her usual pace, deliberate, giving nothing to anyone who wasn't meant to receive it. She didn't look at Victor Vale. She didn't look at Philip Strand, who had gone completely rigid in his chair. She didn't acknowledge the cameras. She looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, she said, her voice clear enough to reach every corner without being raised, I am Captain Olivia Grant of the Brenton City Internal Affairs Division. I am here to formally submit recovered evidence in the matter of Mercer v. Vale, and supplementary documentation relevant to the conduct of these proceedings. She set a sealed evidence case on the exhibit table. The materials include the original security footage from Kettler parking structure, recovered from a backup archive not accessed or altered by any party in this case. They also include authorization records, communication logs, and a sworn cooperative statement from Conrad Briggs. A sharp ripple moved through the gallery. A reporter in the back row stood without thinking. The tightening around Carter's jaw was visible from across the room. Your Honor, Grant said, quieter now, I respectfully request that this court view the footage before any ruling is made. He had no legal ground to refuse. Not here. Not in front of this room. The footage played on the courtroom screen. The room was so quiet I could hear the projector fan turning. Kettler parking structure. Camera 4. Lower level. October 4th. 11:22 p.m. I watched myself walk into frame, flashlight moving in steady arcs. I watched Victor Vale at the blue sedan, both hands raised. Then I watched him pull the knife. No angle problem. No blur. No gap where doubt could be inserted. The camera caught all of it, the reach behind his back, the blade appearing, the lunge forward, the moment it drove into my arm while my hands were still open and empty in front of me. A single breath escaped somewhere in the gallery. The footage continued. I staggered and drew. Victor lunged a second time. I took hold of him and pressed him to the concrete, blood spreading steadily beneath my arm. I held him there without striking him again until the backup lights swept through the entrance and 2 officers ran in. When the screen went dark, nobody spoke for a long moment. Philip Strand shuffled his papers with the hollow energy of hands that had nowhere useful to go. Victor Vale, who had sat through the hearing with arms crossed and chin up, slowly set both hands flat on the table. The confident look I had seen on the courthouse steps, the tap on the chest, the mouthed words, was completely gone. Judge Carter stared straight ahead. The ruling had already collapsed. Every person in that courtroom could feel it, the way you feel pressure drop before a storm. Grant addressed the courtroom from the evidence table. She laid the investigation out methodically, each fact connecting to the next, no drama, no pauses for effect. Conrad Briggs had used his city consultant credential to access the evidence management system and manually delete the primary footage archive 49 hours after October 4th. He had done so on Philip Strand's direct instruction, sent through an encrypted messaging app. Those messages had been recovered. Philip Strand had been in contact with Victor Vale's associates in the 48 hours before the attack, not just after it. Call records and logs showed coordination before the incident. The assault had been carried out with a plan already in place for managing the evidence afterward. Hector Van had been visited and threatened before the trial by a private investigator with documented ties to Strand's firm. The investigator had obtained Hector's address through an unauthorized data request that had since been fully traced. And Judge Randall Carter had received 2 payments from a shell company with verified connections to Conrad Briggs, one the month before my trial began, one the week it concluded. The warrants had been signed before Grant walked through those doors. A court officer moved toward Strand. A second positioned himself beside Victor Vale. A third stood at the chamber entrance. Victor looked around the room once, quickly, with the eyes of someone realizing every exit is sealed. Then his gaze found mine. His face held nothing. No mockery. No confidence. No performance. Just the blank expression of a man finally standing in front of what he earned. 3 weeks later I walked back through the precinct doors without a sling. The civil judgment had been overturned and dismissed with prejudice. The $14,000 order was erased from the record. My personnel file was fully cleared. 11 years of service, uninterrupted. Victor Vale was in custody on charges of aggravated assault on a law enforcement officer, conspiracy to tamper with evidence, and obstruction of justice. Philip Strand surrendered his law license. Conrad Briggs entered a guilty plea and began cooperating with federal investigators reviewing related cases. Judge Randall Carter submitted his resignation 3 days after the hearing. The State Judicial Review Board opened a formal investigation. His name no longer appeared on any active docket in this city. Rena handed me a coffee that first morning and nodded toward the bulletin board by the watch commander's desk. The City Council had passed the Evidence Integrity Protection Act, requiring independent dual system verification before any digital evidence could be declared corrupted in any legal proceeding. They named it after my case number. That evening I stood outside the station and looked at the quiet street. Same city. Same cold air, but something had settled differently. The system had been deliberately turned against me by people who believed I had nothing to fight back with. They were wrong. If this story moved you, please hit the like button. Stories like this need to find the people who need them. Drop a comment below. If you were in Daniel's position, what would you have done first? Subscribe and ring the bell, because next week we are telling the story of a paramedic who saved a child and was fired for it, and the official who tried to keep that truth buried.